So again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our weekly COVID-19 crisis management update webinar. Welcome to everyone who has joined us. We have many clients on the call, including some very new clients. We have a lot of our contacts and various people that I have met at conferences and events over the years. I'd also like to welcome IOD members who are joining us today, and also Common Purpose members who I did a webinar with earlier this week, and I know a number of you are joining this session as well. And the good news is the content is slightly different, so you won't be hearing the same thing twice. So thank you all very much for joining. It's a huge privilege to be able to be communicating with you at this time, and I sincerely hope in some small way to help you grapple with what we're all facing from an organisational or business perspective. So what I'd like to do first of all, just for those of you who are logging in for the first time and we perhaps haven't met in the past, quick introduction. My name is Jonathan Hemus. I'm the Managing Director of Insignia. Insignia is a specialist crisis management consultancy. We help leaders of businesses to plan, train, rehearse, and sometimes handle the worst days of their business lives. And traditionally, that's been things like cyber incidents, product contamination, accidents, environmental incidents, management fraud. Clearly, the whole world and all of the business leaders around it are pretty much managing the same crisis today, which of course is the coronavirus pandemic. Those of you that are joining for the first time, just to let you know, we've run a series of webinars. I think this is the fourth webinar we've done in 4 weeks, and we run these on a weekly basis. There is other content on the previous webinars, so just to say that if you're interested in hearing more and you haven't heard the previous webinars, maybe go back to the resources page on our website and you'll be able to kind of catch up on some of the concepts and topics that we have covered previously. So for today, there are 4 main areas that I wanted to cover with you. Taking stock, in other words, helping you to assess where are you now and how are things going from a business point of view and from a crisis management response point of view. And then I want to talk about when is or isn't the right time for kind of starting to think about business as usual, and in particular, how soon and in what way you should go back to communicating with your stakeholders, and in particular your customers or service users, as to the normal activities, products or services of your business, because that's a topic that has cropped up in multiple conversations with clients this week, and so it's clearly something people are thinking about. So I wanted to shed some light on that. And then again, just to remind you of the additional support that Insignia can provide. Please do post questions, either about what I'm saying or just generally things you'd like me to respond to. It's really helpful if I know what's of concern to you at the moment. So please don't feel frightened to post a question via the questions pane on the top right hand side of your screens. I won't answer them as I go, because I'm pretty good at juggling, but there is a limit to the amount of technology I can handle, but I will come back to as many of them at the end. So I'll talk for 30 to 40 minutes and we'll then see what we have by way of questions. So, taking stock. So one of the things I've learned in a crisis is that there is a real danger of simply keeping your head down. Once you are rolling and responding to the crisis, you can become either head down or very blinkered and just continue going straight on throughout the crisis. And whilst that's very tempting because you want to get as much done as quickly as possible, it is equally important to, from time to time, take stock of where you are And as a guideline, I would say, as an absolute minimum, take a step back on a weekly basis to reappraise, reassess, review where you are right now and where you want or need to go to next. So just take a breath, step back. Okay, let me talk to you about how you should then take stock. So for those of you who have been on previous calls, you will know I've talked a lot about this concept of strategic intent, and here it is again in this webinar. For those who haven't been on previous calls, I will quickly summarize. Your strategic intent is what you, at a very senior level, define as the end point to which you are all aiming. This is where we want to get to by the end of this crisis, and we're looking at something like a 6-month planning time frame. So let's say by the end of September, this is what we want to have achieved, this is where we want to be as an organisation. And the purpose of the strategic intent is to align particularly the leadership team around a single direction and a single purpose. It means that everybody is literally heading in the same direction. The second reason why it's so important is that it, at a time of great pressure and uncertainty, it makes decision making and action planning just that little bit easier, because if you know what it is that you're seeking to achieve or where you're trying to get to, it makes an individual decision that much easier, because you can review that decision mindful of where it is that we want to get to. So here's an example that I've used on the previous webinars. One client's strategic intent is to take operational steps to emerge from the current situation as quickly and strongly as possible, whilst remaining true to our values and without jeopardizing our long-term vision. The reason I put this up again now is in the context of taking stock. So let's say you do have a weekly meeting to take stock. At that weekly meeting, you make sure that everybody is reminded of the strategic intent, and you have a discussion, a review of how are we doing in terms of moving towards our strategic intent. Are we closer this week than we were last week? Have the actions and decisions that we've taken this week actually aligned with that strategic intent, or have we got a little bit distracted or pragmatic or expedient and we're starting to go off in the wrong direction? So come back to your strategic intent on a weekly basis and evaluate, has what we have done over the last week taken us nearer to that strategic intent? Have we stayed true to it? And if in any cases the answer to those questions is no, why? And, are we still happy with the strategic intent? Right, then let's realign around it and continue in the correct direction. And by the way, I'm very conscious I'm saying you and your team. We have on this webinar some very, very, very big global international businesses. We also have on this line some small businesses, even some sole traders. So adapt what I'm saying to the environment in which you're operating. The principle holds true whether it's you individually asking yourself that question or whether it's a team of 8 executives dialing in by video conference from around the world. The second concept that I've talked a lot about is top priority or main effort. So strategic intent stays the same throughout the crisis. Main effort will change as the most important thing that you need to be focusing on now changes, because that's what top priority or main effort is. Where are we going to devote disproportionate amount of attention right now, because it is the most important thing that we need to address right now. So again, we had this example last week of our top priority right now is to stay close to our customers to ensure we retain their trust by providing them with the support they need. So again, at your weekly catch-up, your taking stock meeting, check, will this still be our main effort tomorrow or next week? Or is now the time to say, do you know what? This moment in time has passed. This top priority is no longer the top priority. We have a new top priority. And again, just to emphasize, when you look at your strategic intent, it is very, very rare that a strategic intent would change during a crisis. It's possible, but very unlikely. Whereas top priority or main effort is certain to change. So that weekly taking stock is a very good time to say, do we need another 2 or 3 days of doing this? Or is now the time that we need to move on to whatever the next top priority is? I also wanted to remind those of you who were on last week's call and to introduce to those who weren't of another really helpful mechanism to take stock, the 4-board system. I will go through it much quicker than I did last week, but the 4-board system, and clearly in the context in which we're operating now, they are not 4 literal whiteboards. They need to be 4 documents which come together to provide the whole picture and are available online in a place in which information is shared so the whole team can see them. So you can use them to take stock, again, maybe at that weekly meeting that you hold. So it covers what is the situation. Make sure that if you do have a team, everybody on that team is fully appraised of the situation now. You would be amazed at how quickly people can lose track of what's going on and you lack that shared understanding of what the status is right now. So it's a really good opportunity to make sure that everybody has the latest information and everybody shares the same quality of information. So the situation overview board records what is the situation, what are the latest facts, what are the most important things that the team needs to know about this situation. Strategic intent, I think we all know what that is, and as we've said, that remains constant, but at this weekly meeting you will remind people of that. Critical issues, so the current critical issues that need to be addressed, and frankly that's the flip side of the main effort. What's the most important thing we need to deal with now? Right, now we understand that, that's where our main effort is going to be. So again, critical issues definitely are worthy of review and updating on a weekly basis at that weekly meeting. And then finally, the 4th board logs actions and decisions. So you should be verifying that the actions that were assigned to individuals at your previous meeting have indeed been completed in a timely manner. There will be some that won't have been completed, and we need to, check whether those need to stay on the action list or actually if they are now redundant. And you will want to add new decisions or actions as a result of that meeting. So again, the 4-board system is a very good way of helping you to take stock and making sure that you're not simply just following this very narrow direct path, which may not be the right path in the light of new circumstances. And if there's one thing we know for sure, it's that this is an incredibly dynamic situation. The other thing about taking stock, you will all have your own stakeholders, whether they're employees, customers, suppliers. The other way of taking stock is to communicate with them, probably on a one-to-one basis, because you are seeing the situation from your own unique perspective. Whatever your role within your organization and whatever your personal situation, you are viewing this situation through your own individual lens. How you are seeing the world and the situation and your organization's response to it might be quite different from how your employees are viewing it, or how your customers are viewing it, or how your suppliers are viewing it. So now is a really important time for you to make a few phone calls, talk to people that you trust or you feel have a good perspective, and just ask them some open questions about how they're viewing the situation, particularly how they're viewing the situation in the context of how your organization is working with them. Is what you're doing and saying, is that resonating? Is it addressing the main concerns or requirements of those stakeholders, or is it falling short in some regard? So don't do this taking stock in isolation. Do it in very close collaboration with the stakeholders who are most important to you and your business. So, few thoughts for you to digest and hopefully act on with regards to taking stock and making sure that you are still on the right track in responding to this crisis. I said I've had a number of conversations about, are we now at the beginning of business as usual, and what is it appropriate for us to do and say with regards to business as usual? And I think there's probably 2 or 3 people on this call with whom I've had those conversations, and so it clearly is on both your minds and also a number of other organisations that have asked me the same questions. And so I thought it'd be a really useful area to walk through. Interestingly, this is one of the key areas that is coming up as a question in terms of business as usual. Is it appropriate to go out and sell at the moment, promote our products? So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that an organisation has determined that now is the right time, and so it's committed to a new main effort, which is our top priority right now is to begin stimulating sales by resuming sales and marketing activity to improve our financial position. Entirely understandable, as we all know, all organisations and businesses are far from exempt, are facing really challenging times at the moment, and so clearly, as business leaders, or even organizations which are not businesses but want to get back to doing what they care about, there is a real driver to maybe not get back to business as usual now, but to do something like business as usual, or 25% of business as usual, or 50% of business as usual. So the question that I really want to address and kind of help you with is a top priority of beginning to stimulate sales or activity by resuming sales and marketing activity to improve our financial position? Is that a sensible, legitimate, prudent main effort right now? And to help evaluate that, there's a really insightful and I think very useful piece of research which came out just a couple of days ago from Edelman, the global PR consultancy. They have for many years issued something called their annual Trust Barometer, which talks about trust in all sorts of organizations, not just businesses, but politicians and government and whole range of different types of authority figures. And they have done some special one-off research around trust and the coronavirus and what that means for. They've described them as brands, but I think you can substitute the word brand for organization. So, what does this mean for organizations around the time of coronavirus? So all of the following charts are taken from the Edelman Trust Barometer, specifically the Trust and the Coronavirus Barometer. Thanks to them for providing this insight. And, if you're particularly interested in this, you will find it very easily if you Google for it online. So what did they find, and what are some of the implications of what they found? Okay, so the first thing is, when you are thinking about communicating about your services or products at this time, it's really helpful, very helpful, if they are solution focused, in particular products and services that can help people cope with pandemic related life challenges. So in other words, what the people they interviewed, and this research was concluded on the 26th of March, so it is recent and therefore relevant, and it's global. 84% of people said that they either hoped or expected organizations to do that. So 84% of people are supportive of organisations advertising products and services that can help people cope with pandemic-related life challenges. So they're happy for you to talk about what you do, but possibly only, or certainly mainly, if they are related to pandemic-related life challenges. And I'm going to give you some examples later on. Secondly, 77% of people that were surveyed said that organisations should only talk about products and services in ways that show they are aware of the crisis and the impact it is having on people's lives. Let me translate that. What that means is you should not talk about your products and services in isolation, outside of the context of the current crisis. Putting out messages now in a vacuum without any relation to or mention of the current crisis will not be well received. Anything that you put out there must be in the context of the impact of coronavirus on people's lives. This is really a build on the previous slide. So if you do want to communicate about your products and services, focus on those products and services that can genuinely help. So again, 89% of those surveyed said that brands must shift to promoting and producing products and services that help people meet the current challenges. They also endorsed organisations offering free or lower priced products to health workers, high-risk individuals and those whose jobs have been affected. So going the extra mile for those who are most impacted by the coronavirus will be received well and will be beneficial to your organisation in terms of trust and respect. And over half of the people surveyed said, I am just not paying attention to new products right now unless they are designed to help me with my pandemic-related life challenges. So if you've got a phenomenal new product that you were just about to launch, or new service, but it actually has no relevance whatsoever to the pandemic, it would be a very good idea not to launch that product right now, because even if it doesn't cause offence, it is unlikely to achieve the impact or the results that you would like it to do if it were to be launched at a more normal time. So the question, should I communicate? So we're going to have this produced as a checklist that will be again available from our website, and if for whatever reason you can't access our website, just drop me a line and I will send you a copy as a PDF. But here are the questions I think you should be asking yourself when you are considering whether to communicate about your services or your products or your normal activities at this time. So, question 1, compared with business as usual, is your product or service currently more relevant or useful than usual, equally relevant or useful compared with usual, less relevant or useful than usual, or not at all relevant or useful compared with usual? That was a mouthful. So some examples. Video conferencing, we're all using it. Many people have been using it for the first time, and that's exploded. And clearly, with people being around the world being in lockdown, actually video conferencing services are more relevant than usual currently. There are some products or services which are equally relevant. Food, we still need food, so food is a relevant, equally relevant product. There are things that are less relevant. For example, if you're an online clothing retailer, people may well still buy clothes, but it's not as important or relevant as it usually would be. And then there are those services or products which are not at all relevant or useful at the moment. Sadly, restaurants are irrelevant at the moment in terms of promoting their products or services because they can't open. So that's the first question. And by the way, I hope it's obvious. There is a green light for communication around the more relevant. There's a green stroke amber light for equally relevant or useful products or services. There's a strong amber light for the less relevant and useful services, and a red light for the not at all relevant services. And then the second question is, even if you are in the equally or more relevant category, is now the best time to communicate? Are customers in the mood to buy? Are they actually going to want to buy the services that you offer at the moment? And can they afford to buy, given the economic impact of what's going on? And if the answer is no, again, to the previous slide, should you be doing something special to help people access your products or services, particularly if they are very relevant or useful at the moment? What can you be doing commercially to allow more people to access those products and services? Let's look at some examples, and I've kind of touched on this already. Zoom, which I'm sure pretty much everybody on this line, if they hadn't used Zoom video conferencing before this crisis, I'll bet most of you have now. So for Zoom to be talking about COVID-19 on their website and to be offering their product to businesses and other people is entirely legitimate, because Zoom is a solution to the problems that we are facing at the moment. So entirely legitimate for Zoom to be communicating about its products and services. It's also entirely legitimate for Just Eat to be communicating about its products and services. They're probably on that level down from Zoom, where there's a really increased need for Zoom. For Just Eat, there is still a need, not a greater need, but there is still a need. And frankly, for those of us in lockdown, the ability to have something different to eat from a local restaurant or takeaway is actually quite nice. So I think it's entirely legitimate for Just Eat to communicate. And notice they're going beyond just communicating. They are doing the 25% off the price for all NHS staff. So that's, legitimate piece of communication, well executed. This one kind of, it's two sides of a coin. So this is a piece of direct mail that came through someone's letterbox earlier this week. It's Dignity, the funeral company, with a piece of direct mail about a funeral plan. You pay X £100 a month. It's like an insurance policy, which means that ultimately the price of your funeral is covered, and therefore your family doesn't have to worry about paying that money. Now, this was, so let's look at this product or service for what it is. Are funerals more or less relevant right now? Sadly, grimly, funerals are more relevant right now, and the cost of funerals is more relevant because, tragically, more people are going to die at the moment. So in terms of, is the service required more now? Yes, it is. I think, and by the way, this is an unfortunate accident. Dignity didn't do this on purpose to try and capitalize on the fact that more people are going to die. This was pre-planned, and sadly, their direct mail campaign happened to coincide with what's going on at the moment. But clearly, if they had known that was to be the case, despite the fact their products and services relevant, this way of communicating, I don't think would have been appropriate, not least of all because in order to qualify for the insurance cover, you need to have paid in for at least 12 months. And I guess the other point I wanted to make on the back of this particular example is, do have your marketing departments, if you have such a thing, just double checking what's planned in terms of promotional activity over the coming weeks and months. I'm sure most of you will have done that already and changes will have been made, but do the due diligence, because you don't want to appear to be insensitive simply because something that was scheduled months ago hasn't been rescheduled given current circumstances. this is an example where I think, yes, is health cover relevant right now? Yes, it is. But for this to land in my inbox right now, for me, crosses the line into really insensitive. With the NHS so stretched, isn't it time you thought about private healthcare from £14.64 a month? Maybe the communication could happen, but the way in which it is communicated, the actual messaging, turns it from being something which actually might be of interest to a situation whereby I'm thinking, I really don't like this organisation very much for sending this at this time. And my own personal favourite that a number of you may have seen on a previous webinar, Mr. Porter, who were trying to sell me shirts on the basis that people are only going to see the top half of my body on video conferences now, and I need the top half of my body to look as good as possible. This is the category of the less relevant product and an organisation trying to piggyback on the current situation with their marketing. I don't think this is offensive. I think it's slightly ill-judged, and I would imagine that many people are not really in the mood to be ordering beautiful, expensive shirts at the moment. So ill-judged, but not as damaging as some of the more crass examples. Talking of which, you will have all, certainly those of you in the UK, will have been aware of the situation whereby Sports Direct sought to position its shop workers as essential workers on the basis that they were selling gym kits to help people stay fit whilst on lockdown. What also emerged the day after that news came out was that overnight they had increased the prices of many of their gym products that you would use at home by more than 50%. So that is clearly, it is not a product. Well, home gym products actually are more relevant at the moment, but to capitalize on that, and one might suggest try and profiteer from it, certainly is ill-judged and likely to do the organization harm. So why do I say it'll cause you harm? Well, again, it's substantiated by the Edelman research. So what they found was 1/3 of people say they have already stopped using a brand they felt was not acting appropriately in response to the pandemic, and indeed have convinced other people to stop using that brand. So there are already organisations right now that are suffering because they are deemed not to have responded appropriately to the pandemic. And if we look to the future, that number doubles. So 2/3 of people agreed that how well an organisation responds to this crisis will have a huge impact on my likelihood to buy from that organisation in the future. So 2/3 of people say how you respond now will have a huge impact on their likelihood to engage with you in future. Remember that and be very mindful of what you do and say right now, because this will, what you do now will be etched on people's minds in future. And an even higher number agreed with the statement, brands and companies that I see placing their profits before people during this crisis will lose my trust forever. 7 out of 10 people said brands and companies that I see placing their profits before people during this crisis will lose my trust forever. One might suggest that that is profit before people. One might suggest that trust in that brand is forever lost for 7 out of 10 people. So I think the message from those last 3 slides is respond badly and it will quite possibly harm you now. Respond badly and it will affect you badly in the short to medium term, but most chillingly of all, respond badly and it may affect you forever. So be very careful about what you do and say right now. So if you've ticked the boxes and actually it is appropriate that you should communicate because you do have something relevant and important to say, how should you do that? So what should that communication look like? Well, first of all, it needs to demonstrate deep empathy for your customers. This is, as per a previous webinar, absolutely looking at the world from their perspective in their shoes. So you might want to tell them loads of things about your wonderful products and services, but you need to be communicating what they're interested in, what their concerns are, what their anxieties are, what their requirements are. We saw from the research slides, whatever you communicate must explicitly recognize the context in which that communication is taking place. You can't send out a piece of marketing material that makes no mention of the existence of COVID-19. Somehow, whatever you say needs to be presented in the context of what people are experiencing right now. Again, we saw on one of the pieces of research, your communication should be about how your product or service can help people. How does this provide a solution to what you are currently facing? It's not about flogging a product, it's about getting their permission for you to provide them with your product and service in order to genuinely help them. The tone of voice needs to be right, human, sensitive, and understated. Understated clearly being the opposite of in your face, pushy, highly promotional. And it should be communicated with courtesy, respect, and humility. And finally, with generosity. In other words, the Just Eat 25% off and other businesses who are doing similar things will stand you in very good stead in terms of retaining and hopefully increasing the trust of your customers and other stakeholders. Got just over 20 minutes of the webinar left. Please do continue to post your questions or even just observations as I go into the kind of final third of the webinar. So if I now move on from specifically thinking about this dilemma around whether it's appropriate to talk about my products and services right now, I wanted to give you some further guidance, again informed by the Edelman research, around your broader stakeholder communication. So again, to be clear, I am not now talking specifically about selling your products and services. I'm simply talking about how you communicate with your stakeholders more broadly right now, whether they're your employees or they're other stakeholder groups. So what I've said on previous webinars is it's important to be transparent and frequent with your communication, and that is endorsed by Edelman's research. Just to explain to you what this bar chart means, basically, recipients were asked to say whether they wanted to hear from organisations about what they were doing to respond to the pandemic, because that was comforting and reassuring, or actually was communicating about the virus, adding to anxiety and concern. So the bottom line is, do they want organisations to communicate with them, or do they not want organisations to communicate with them? And overwhelmingly, they do want organisations to communicate with them. The black bar is people saying, yes, I do want to hear from organisations about what they're doing to respond to the pandemic because it's comforting and reassuring. The lighter coloured bar is from those people who said, no, I don't want to hear from organisations about their response to the pandemic because it's simply adding to my anxiety and concern. And, roughly kind of 2 to 1 overall, people are saying, we want to hear from you. So again, for those people with whom I've been having conversations, or maybe you've been having your own debates internally about is actually us communicating about our response to coronavirus, frightening people and actually adding to their anxiety, there is a strong groundswell of opinion that says, no, we want to hear from you. Specifically, employees want you to communicate. So 63% of employees that they talked to said that their employer should share information about the coronavirus at least daily. So pretty much 2 out of 3, if you're an employer want you to share information about the coronavirus at least daily. This again comes back to something I've said on previous webinars, which is that you may be surprised at how frequently you need to communicate. It's very much a case of you can't communicate too much, particularly to your staff. And if if you go for your initial frequency and then double or treble the frequency, you're probably somewhere near the mark. But most employees want information at least daily. The outside world also expects you to care for your employees. So people in general, 90% agree with the statement, brands must do everything they can to protect the well-being and financial security of their employees and their suppliers, even if it means suffering big financial losses until the pandemic ends. Now, if you're a business owner or a business leader, that is a tough message, and it will test your values to the core, because what people are saying is what they expect organizations to do is to look after the health and well-being of their employees and their financial security, even if that means the organization suffering big financial losses. I think, the converse clearly is also true. If you are seen to be irresponsible or inadequate in the way that you are protecting employees' well-being, for example, forcing them to come into work when, to most right-thinking people, that isn't necessary, they're not key workers, and or you are booting them out of the door with no second thought, no furloughing, no financial severance, that will become public, because we know what social media is like, and you will be judged harshly. So commercially, clearly that is a tough message, but from the perspective of reputation and long-term trust, it is critical that you do and say the right things to protect your employees. You must also communicate what you are doing. So this is, again, another drum that I bang frequently in good times as well as bad, which is that crisis management is about doing the right thing and also saying the right thing. Just taking action isn't enough if you don't actually communicate the action that you are taking. So people want you to communicate how you're helping. And so 90%, 89% of people said that organizations must keep the public fully informed regarding how they are supporting and protecting their employees and customers. So telling the outside world what you're doing is important. As is 88% saying organizations should keep people fully informed regarding changes in how the brand is operating and in how to gain access to its products and services. So communicate frequently, communicate transparently. And I would kind of draw your attention to the communication material checklist, which again we showed on a previous webinar, and again there is a resource which you can download and print out on our website, which gives you this checklist as a PDF. But when you are drafting a piece of customer, employee, supplier, whomever communication, go through this checklist to avoid falling foul of what we've heard people don't want on those previous slides. Is it empathetic? Does it really recognize the position that your stakeholder with whom you're communicating is in? Is it sensitive? Is it sensitive to them? Is it sensitive to the current situation? Is it communicated in context? Is it human? We don't want hard corporate robots talking to us at the moment. Is it clear and simple? Does it communicate the action that needs to be taken? Is it straightforward? Is it practical? Can the people receiving it understand it and know what they need to do as a result? Is it in line with your values? Does it feel like your organisation communicating this? Is this what people expect of your organisation? And are messages substantiated? This is the thing about saying the right thing, but saying the right thing is only half of the equation. The other half is doing the right thing. So is what you're saying substantiated by evidence? I guess in summary, it comes back again to how do you want to be remembered? I mentioned earlier that what organisations do at this time of crisis will be etched on people's memories for a long, long time. And it's important to decide now whether you want to be remembered as a hero or a villain. And I think it's pretty clear the fact that you're on this call means that you want to be heroes, and make sure that what you do and say supports that objective. So I'm going to just quickly remind you of the free resources that we have available, and then we've got just over 10 minutes. I haven't checked whether we've got questions. If you've got a burning question now, please do post it and I'll do my best to go through those. But in terms of other help, right, the weekly webinar is continuing. Interest remains at very high levels. There's as many people on this webinar as there were for the previous 3. So clearly people are still finding it of value, which I'm delighted with. So that will continue. If you're signed up for the webinar, you will also receive the weekly email update with further insights and resources. And we still haven't quite launched the chat room, but that is coming soon. The website I've talked about on a couple of previous sessions. We, with 7 other experts that have value to provide at the moment, have come together to launch a website called COVID-19 Business Continuity Network. There are 7 streams within that website. There's crisis management, which I'm leading, but there's also sections in there, for example, on how to manage a virtual team, how to manage the financial impact from a business point of view of what's going on, and how to stay personally resilient. So if you're looking for further resources and support, that's a great place to have a look at. Again, as with these webinars, no selling there, simply high quality, useful information. And I just wanted to talk about next week's webinar. It's Good Friday next week. I had sadly forgotten that fact. Like many of you, I'm sure every day kind of feels the same at the moment, but next Friday is a public holiday. So we're going to run this webinar on Thursday instead, but at the same time. And in addition to me spending a few minutes bringing you up to date with what we're seeing and some helpful tips, I've also invited a guy I've known for a number of years now, Martin Alderton, who runs a business called Clarity, Stress and Trauma, to join us and to spend, the majority of that call, perhaps 30 minutes, talking about how to cope with the psychological reactions that people are experiencing in the pandemic. Martin's done a lot of work in the travel sector around, plane crashes, coach crashes, and he'll be sharing expertise both around how you can support your people who may be going through very traumatic, upsetting times over the coming weeks and months, what you can do to give them some support, and also how we as business leaders and simply as individuals can deal with our own anxieties and stress at the moment. So slightly different tack, but I thought it was very, very relevant, particularly, sadly, here in the UK. And I know we have participants from other parts of the world, but particularly as we in the UK start to go into a much more serious, in terms of loss of life, phase of this crisis. So Martin will join us next week. Right, we have 10 minutes. Let's see if we have any questions. We do. So first one, we're a small 5-strong company. We've always had a very collaborative management structure. how much should I involve all of the staff in all of the decisions? Really good question, Paul. Only you can make that final judgment, but I would suggest that if you've been very collaborative and very open throughout, I think you would further solidify the trust and respect of your broader team by involving them directly in it. You will know any individual likes to be involved, and I say if you've built up that bond of trust previously, then I think it would be entirely appropriate to continue with that now. You are presumably dealing with grown people, adults, and the other thing is, they will bring useful perspectives. So I would certainly advise involving them to the maximum. Yeah, I won't mention the name, but Diane, yes, Diane's saying if only X organisation was on this webinar. I'm guessing your perception or experience, rather, Diane, of how they have responded does not align with some of the best practice that we have been talking about. Addy, thank you, saying that this is very relevant to charitable organisations, and they will be sharing that with their board. Okay, we have got through the questions. We've just got 2 or 3 questions in today. So we've got up to 8 minutes. If anyone else has a question, I will just allow a bit of space to see if anyone does have any. If not, again, thank you very much for joining. If you don't want to ask a question now, please do feel free to drop me an email, and let me put my contact details on the slide. Please do feel free to drop me an email or call me. If there's anything you'd like to discuss on a one-to-one basis, I'd be more than happy to do that. Equally, if there's something you'd like to see us cover on a future webinar, or if there's something that's just concerning you, let me know, because we'd be only too pleased to help. So again, thank you all for joining the session. I wish you well in what you're doing, and anything we can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask. Our only motivation right now is to help and avoid unnecessary damage to organisations, their stakeholders, their lives and livelihoods. So whatever you need, please just ask, and I will see you next week. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.